Our teaching text today is from John 10:11 through 21. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. The Jews who heard these words were again divided. Many of them said, "He is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him?" But others said, "These are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" This is the word of the Lord.
Well, a very good evening to you. How's everybody doing? I don't want to be rude, there's a little more energy in the worship. Maybe it's the metaphor, shepherding and sheep. Resonates deeply with New Yorkers. And if you grew up in a sheep farm? No, so we have some work to do to close the cultural gap. Let's start on the sheep meadow, which was a part of New York City not too long ago. At least have that as a reference point. I'm off to a bad start. I'm going to jump back in here. We are in a series on the I am statements of Jesus. And we thought this was important at the start of the year because you have Jesus talking and describing who he is. There's a lot of opinions in our world about Jesus and a lot of claims about who Jesus was and what he taught. But we've spent the last few weeks examining who Jesus says he is. So these are words from Jesus' mouth. God has always wanted to reveal himself to his people. In the Old Testament, he did it in several ways. He did it in a pillar of fire. He did it in a cloud. He did it in a burning bush. He did it through miracles. And when Moses said, "Look, I want to go and disclose to Pharaoh who's about to show up," and God very, very helpfully cleared up and just said, "I am." And he's like, "What do I tell him?" "Just tell him I am." And this phrase, when it was translated into the New Testament, ego eimi in the Greek, is I am from the Old Testament. So you have Jesus now claiming to be the God of the Old Testament manifest in the flesh. He's not just in a fire. He's not just in a cloud. He's not just in a bush. He's in a person. And he's standing before us. And so listening to what Jesus says is very important because there's a lot of religious claims in the world. There's a lot of people telling you that you should follow them and you'll find life. And here the Bible is actually teaching us, here's what your life will look like if you surrender to God. What would it be like if I just gave myself over to him? This is what Jesus is addressing here. And each week we've tried to basically map one of the core longings of the human heart and show how God is meeting that through Jesus. So the first week we talked about Jesus as the bread of life and how we have this longing for satisfaction in the soul and how ultimately it's only fulfilled in Jesus. Last week, Susie did a wonderful job talking about Jesus being the light of the world. As a society, we ache for revelation and epiphany. Everybody wants to be an enlightened being. And here we have Jesus saying, "I bring light to the darkness." Amazing. And tonight we're going to look at this metaphor around Jesus, the Good Shepherd. Now, I want you to know that this text is primarily not about shepherding. This text is primarily about leadership. This is a text about leadership. Our culture aches for good leadership, doesn't it? It's groaning for good leadership. I just saw a new round of political candidates announcing that in 2020, they alone can bring America back to the place that it's supposed to be. And you know what most people's response is? Doubt it. Who do we trust to lead us? Can we trust a religious institution to lead us? Should we trust celebrities and their endorsements? Should we follow them as those who lead us? What about our parents? If you're a teenager here, you should listen to your parents. But for those of us who are adults, do we listen to our parents, their wisdom from another generation? Who do we listen to? There's been so much abuse in leadership that I feel like almost everybody I meet, particularly here in the city, sort of has this deep, cynical suspicion about anybody who says, trust me, follow me, you will find life. It's like we've almost woven ourselves into a cocoon of suspicion. It's a very comfortable little cocoon, but if anybody tries to get into it, the lens they have to go through is like, I'm just suspicious about your power dynamics, I'm suspicious about your agenda. I just can't trust any sort of leadership. Now, here's the problem. We long to be led as people. We long to be led. We long for someone to give us a compelling picture of the future that we can align ourselves under and to follow. This is in the heart of human beings. But the question we're really asking is this: who can I trust to really lead and care for me? Who can I hand myself over and say, look, I will follow you because I trust that you're going to show care for my heart and that you're going to lead me into the future that my heart actually aches for. That's really what this passage is about. So the context of this passage, 2 notes I want you to see. Number 1, yes, Jesus does use a shepherding metaphor here. And this is primarily about something that happened in the ancient Near East. This is first century Judaism. The shepherd was a prominent figure, certainly because of David, King David starting as a shepherd. And they had an understanding of a shepherd and his relationship to the sheep. And so these shepherds, primarily this was the economy, this was their wealth. They spent a lot of time with the sheep, and they developed intimate relationships, deep friendships with these sheep, these animals. They just cared for them. They had this beautiful sort of arrangement of the whole of their lives. They slept out under the stars. It's an amazing environment. That was a part of the metaphor Jesus is using. But the real context I want you to see in this passage is primarily about the claims of leadership. If you go back, you begin to see this fault line develop in the ministry of Jesus, where the religious leaders of his day begin to hate him. So at the end of John chapter 7, Jesus stands up at the Festival of Tabernacles, and he stands up, and on the last and greatest day of the feast, he cries out in a loud voice, if anybody is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Well, what a claim. What a claim. Imagine someone at a big church conference saying, if any of you are thirsty, come to me and drink, and you'll never thirst again. But I'm really talking about the Holy Spirit that you get later if you believe in me. People will be like, this guy's out of his mind. And that's what they said about Jesus. Is he demon-possessed? Why is he talking like this? John chapter 8, it's not just Jesus' religious claims. John chapter 8, you'll remember they dragged the woman caught in adultery in front of Jesus as a trap. And then they get so frustrated because Jesus' rhetorical skills are a little stronger than theirs, and they have to end up dropping their stones and walking away frustrated that the trap they laid didn't work. They don't like Jesus' mercy. Then in John chapter 9, Jesus comes along and he heals a man who's born blind. They don't like the time he does it, the spirit in which he does it. And so again, they begin to attack him, threatening his family. They don't like Jesus' power. So you've got this giant fault line coming between the leaders in Jesus' day and Christ himself. And so in these claims right here, you have this choice which Jesus is setting up and is saying, who will you be led by? This is a claim. It's a leadership assertion by Jesus of his invitation to respond to his leadership, to come under his leadership in our lives. Now, I want you to see this because I think it's very, very important. Because we have this suspicion, this hermeneutic of suspicion over anybody who claims to be a leader or anybody who promises us, any sort of salesman, we're suspicious about them, that we can often think, well, I'm not going to be led by anybody. But I just wanted to tell you something tonight. If you don't consciously choose a leader, you will subconsciously be influenced by somebody else. You will be led. You will be led. You are not walking into a clear future that you choose. You will be led. So I want to show you the options of who will lead your life tonight. The first one I want to talk about is cultural shepherding. Cultural shepherding. This is the way that our culture basically says, follow me, follow me, follow me, and then disciples you into a vision of life. And it does this in several ways. Number one, or the first way it does this is through a thing called choice architecture. Choice architecture, I first read about this in a book called Nudge. Fascinating book that talks about basically how people create choice frameworks that influence the outcome of people without the people necessarily knowing that they've been influenced. So you've got libertarians literally foaming at the mouth at the insinuation of this book. But their framework is like nudge. As an elephant, it's just a little bit of a nudge in the right direction. This is how they articulate it. If you indirectly influence the choices other people make, you're a choice architect. Now, in the book, they give several examples, and there's several examples in society that have been used to sort of illustrate this point. So I'll start simple, and I'll end up in an insidious place, okay? So starting simply, kids' lunchroom. So particularly in poor neighborhoods, not a lot of great food, and an obesity epidemic with small children, and they come to school, and what are their lunch options? Do you want pizza or nuggets and fries? Do you want Coke or Sprite? Do you want cake or cookies? And so what a terrible option. So they began to introduce these things without asking, obviously, for small children's permissions, but they began to replace desserts with fruit. And instead of saying, do you want cake or do you want an apple? They said, would you like an apple, an orange, or a banana? You get to choose. And instead of saying, would you like Coke? It's like, would you like water or healthy juice? So they started putting these options in front of them, and in some studies, kids lose as much as 26% of their weight, like amazing turnarounds just by changing the order that they put things. So basically the goal is to architect environments and then the environment shape you. So whoever controls the framework, whoever controls the environment, whoever controls the choices that are handed to you determines the outcome. And most people are willing to give you the illusion of freedom as long as you're inside the framework of the outcome, any acceptable outcome that they want. This is the way this is located. So another example here, if you're a parent, you've certainly experienced this when your kids are little. It's, shopping is hard when you've got kids. I tell you, it's not fun. If you see a mum shopping with a kid in New York City, I just dare you to carry around Starbucks cards and just say, later when your children are asleep, have a coffee on me. Just bless them. Because the person who designs supermarkets is angry at their parents and trying to get them back. Because your kids are going through and they're pulling stuff off the shelves, they're breaking spaghetti, you just drive off. I mean, all these things are happening. And you get right when the kids are at their crankiest, they literally step into a little portal of Charlie the Chocolate Factory. It's like right at the exit, there's every chocolate. Whole Foods selling terrible things, only at the checkout for small children. So you get there and there's all of these horrible things, and then it's basically, it's a horrible situation. The parents are like, just have the chocolate, shut up, I'm sick of you. And they just try and get them out of there. Someone designed that on purpose. Someone angry designed that on purpose. Seemingly distant forces that we think we decipher can actually change the most intimate parts of our heart without us knowing it. So choice architecture. Of all of the people that lived in the United States, in all of the governmental institutions and agencies, America said this: the best we can do is Hillary and Donald. It's Hillary and Donald. America, behold your future. You get to choose. And I always get frustrated when people say 80% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. It's like, again, a false statement, because a ton of white evangelicals just refused to participate. So it's only those who did vote, still a significant number. But my point is, very few people were like, oh gosh, it's so clear. There's one exceptional candidate of high integrity and high morals in every area of their life that's a clear win. I felt honestly as a Christian, it's like, gosh, there is things in both of their lives and both of their ethical visions of the United States that I just feel like this is not the kind of choice architecture I want. Now you say, well, that didn't really affect me. Well, the choice that was made has affected you. Oh, it's distant. It's got nothing to do with me. How's your heart? When someone says something about the president, what happens in your heart? Father, bless him. It must be really hard to lead America. What's in your heart? Anger, bitterness, vitriol. This stuff that seems so far away because of the choice architecture of our political system is changing the culture of your heart. And it's changing the heart of the United States. So even things that seem distant have this incredible capacity to shape our inner lives. Choice architecture. You're being shepherded by the choices our culture is giving you. Another way that our culture shepherds us is through the informational propaganda that is basically released towards us. I read a short book, certainly from someone who is not theologically centrist, Noam Chomsky. And he wrote a book, fascinating book. I didn't laugh about that in the morning, but you laughed, so thank you. Noam Chomsky wrote a book, honestly, quite an amazing book called Media Control, The Spectacular Achievements of Propaganda. And one of the things that I always find so funny, because these books, particularly I find writers like Foucault, these guys who wrote a while ago when the world was controlled by basically very, very conservative people. They were writing these books, rebelling against authority and power structures. But now that the world is fundamentally liberal, all of their arguments work against themselves because the culture shifted. Anyway, it's fascinating to read modern society in light of the previous critiques. But he basically says that society gets in particular times of history, society is more malleable to outside opinion and shaping. And if you can't get society into a state where it's malleable, you have to shock the society to make it malleable. So we live in a time right now which one author described as, or one lady described it as VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, confusion, and anger. And all of these states, it's volatile, it's uncertain, everybody's confused and they're angry, are beautiful states to have people in when you want to manipulate them. They're heightened, their emotions are heightened, they're dealing with fear of change, they're just looking for somebody to give a strong opinion. So when people are like this, they're particularly open for their minds to be changed. And he uses a phrase which I think has happened staggeringly effectively in the last 15 years that he calls the manufacture of consent. The society, the powers that be, will make you want what you want, but you won't know you're made to want it. It'll just feel like you want it. This really began to take place in the United States during World War I. Woodrow Wilson was elected as the President of the United States, and his platform was peace without victory. And World War I was happening at this point, and everybody was saying, you got to get involved. We need to go over to Europe. And they were just basically like, what are you talking about? Why get involved with that? Way over there. It's got nothing to do with us. But beneath the surface, Wilson actually wanted to go to war, wanted to establish the United States in the conflict. So much of the population was extremely pacifistic, saw no reason to become involved at a general level. So they established a governmental propaganda commission called the Creel Commission, which within 6 months, through the use of propaganda and misdirection and information, got the whole world to be in a giant, horrific fear of the Germans. And so they basically invented atrocities that didn't quite happen. And so what happens when you hear of an atrocity? What happens in your heart? Anger, rage, injustice. Somebody should do something. We should do something. Society easy to manipulate. The whole point of good propaganda is to create slogans that nobody's going to be against and everybody is going to be for. So the carefully crafting cultural slogans that if you're opposed to it, so the language, like the two most abused words in our culture right now are the words hate and love. They're just meaningless. They've been emptied of any ethical meaning. Love is whatever you want to do, and hate is you disagree with me. And so the way you craft these phrases, love and hate, basically enables you to come up with ideology that nobody can resist. This is propaganda at its best. So Noam Chomsky says this: propaganda is to a democracy what a bludgeon is to a totalitarian state. He makes 3 points that basically we're at a time where everything is public relations. So this past week, not a great week in politics in Virginia. I'm sure if you're just sort of paying attention to what's going on. At the start of the week, you've got all of the conservatives in an uproar over the issue of abortion, where the governor seems to advocate infanticide. I mean, I don't know the full context and I try to research, but whatever it is, it was horrific. Later in the week, he is seen posing in some sort of a racially inappropriate, slanderous sort of photo in a party, which he's now denying. But I want you to see this. 2 separate issues, normally connected with 2 different political parties. At the start of the week, you've got PR coming from one group. At the end of the week, different issue, PR coming from another group here. Everything is PR in our world. Everything is public relations. Everything is spin. Nobody's up there trying to legitimately say, let me just apologize. What they're saying is like, how do I get out of this? How do I look good? So they literally bring in PR agents to spin the thing. Engineering opinion, selective perception, all of these things exist. So Chomsky concludes by saying this: state propaganda, when supported by the educated classes and when no deviation is permitted from it, can have a big effect. And I would argue that we've seen this. Another way that this information flows down, perhaps Cambridge Analytica. Now, you're aware of this scandal. These are the people that were connected with Facebook in some way. But one of the executives said this that was so insightful. We just put information into the bloodstream of the internet and then watch it grow. Give it a little push, maybe a nudge, every now and again over time to watch it take shape. And so this stuff infiltrates the online community, but with no branding, so it's unattributable and untrackable. So it just feels like what you should believe. This is choice architecture. This is the selective curating of information. This is propaganda. One author, Annalisa Quinn from the New York Times, said this: a poll last year showed 63% of Democrats and 38% of Republicans saw Russia's power and influence as a significant threat to the United States. But Russia's just one influence, and I love this phrase, in an ecosystem of modern pressures. Lobbyists, drugs, Facebook, covert agents, dark money, foreign agendas, dupes and double agents, fake news, bribes, threats. In the midst of all of these contradictory influences, the world of politics can seem illegible, a chaotic mass of swirling powers. There's a war on for your mind, as the slogan for the conspiracy website InfoWars says. This ecosystem of pressure. You think about your life. You've been culturally shepherded through choice architecture and the selective curation of information towards agenda. And what's our response? Well, we're just like these sheep. We're like these sheep in Turkey. This was like literally a farming tragedy. There's a Turkish sheep die in mass jump. There's 1,500 sheep and one sheep's like stuffing them out and jumps off. And then 1,499 say, me too, and they just roll off. The first 400 die, and then 1,100, because sheep are kind of like soft and fluffy. There's 400 of them. There's 400 of them. And then 1,100 sort of don't die. My point is that one sheep's just like, meh, and that's it. Then the rest is like, us, we're in. This is why politicians use the term sheeple. Sheeple, man, sheeple. Just get one person, get a few celebrities, get a few public figures. Everyone else would just roll on it. Sheeple. So a lot of people, this doesn't feel particularly encouraging. So their response is, well, where else do I look? And so sometimes people will say, you need to look to the church for guidance. You need to look to religion for guidance. Can we trust a religious institution, the church? Can we trust it? A lot of people say, no way. They have a track record, 2,000 years of abuse and coercion and control and hypocrisy. And anytime the church seems to accumulate enough power to run things, it produces a society that excludes and oppresses. Like the leadership under the church doesn't seem to lead to this wonderful, flourishing life. Well, part of the critique is found here in this verse, verses 11 through 13. There's a word that Jesus uses to critique this sort of leadership, and he just uses the term hirelings. Hirelings. Have a look at what he said. He says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, but the hired hand is not the shepherd, doesn't own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and he runs away. Then the wolf attacks and the flock scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Now, every scholar or every commentary I reference on this brought up this one verse, Ezekiel 34. And this is God's critique of the unjust leaders. A rich part of the prophetic tradition critiquing leadership. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who've been feeding themselves. Shouldn't the shepherds feed their flock? You eat the fat, wear the wool, butcher the fattened animals, but you don't tend to the flock. You've not strengthened the weak, healed the sick, bandaged the injured, brought back the strays, or sought the lost. Instead, you've ruled them with violence and cruelty. This is what the Lord says. Look, I'm against the shepherds. I will demand my flock from them and prevent them from shepherding the flock. The shepherds will no longer feed themselves, for I will rescue my flock from their mouths, so they will not be food for them. Self-feeding, eating the fat, wearing the wool, butchering the fattened, failing to care and tend. In essence, using the flock for personal benefit. In one of my seminary classes, I took a course on leadership theory. And one of the theories that was presented under this framework of the toxic triangle. And in the framework of the toxic triangle, they basically said that there's these environments where followers are a part of it. They just destroy people. And it's not bad leadership, it's toxic leadership. Go ahead and have a look at this. This is my adaptation of the theory. So you have destructive leaders. These are at the top. And these people just rely purely on charisma. They accumulate tons of personal power. They're often narcissists. They are angry. They're fearful. And so you have these dynamic leaders at the top, and they often produce susceptible followers. And these followers fall into two categories: those who conform and those who collude with those who are in leadership. So the conformers are often people who have needs or low self-esteem, or they're immature, so they're very, very susceptible. Or you've got colluders, and these are people with ungodly ambition. These are people who are broken, and they see this as an environment basically to prey on people. And this results in coercive environments, instability, where there's fear, there's isolation. And if you get in the middle of one of these environments, it can be absolutely horrific. This is the kind of leadership that is being critiqued right here. See, what ends up happening if you don't lead out of godly vision, you don't lead out of what God has for you, by default, you have to push from behind. When a shepherd pushes from behind, the sheep scatter. And when the sheep scatter, the shepherd has to resort to using dogs. And he unleashes the dogs to round up the sheep. And this is what religion does. It pushes from behind. It pushes you into a future of demands. And then when you can't keep up with it and you try and get out of it, it unleashes guilt, shame, fear, condemnation around you. So you may be moving forward, but it's not out of a free heart. It's not out of joy. It's not out of excitement for the future. It's literally a fear of what's going to happen if you get left behind. And this is the environment of the Pharisees in Jesus' day. Jesus is critiquing this sort of leadership. Well, maybe at this point you're like, look, man, I don't want to be shepherded by the culture. I don't want to be shepherded by the church. I can't trust religion. You know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to shepherd myself. I'm going to shepherd myself. I understand this. I know that feeling in the heart of like, look, man, just don't sell me on something. I understand the feeling of the cocoon of suspicion. New York has just laid a cocoon of suspicion around me all these years. Anytime someone rises with a grandiose vision, I'm like, we'll see. We'll see. And so sometimes we just feel like, look, man, I'm pretty well educated. I'm pretty thoughtful. I'm pretty discerning. I think I'm just going to trust myself. Well, there's several problems with that. Number one is that we actually are slaves to things in our own heart, that if we follow them will lead us into horrific places. You ever had an addiction? I know like we don't talk about it like that often. It doesn't get that much airtime at church. Have you ever found yourself addicted to something and you're honestly just embarrassed about it? Like if you were to get up here and say, hey guys, I just want to tell you what I'm struggling with privately when none of you are around, you would just be like, I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed of this. But one of the things we find is that we actually, very often, we can't lead ourselves. We need to be saved from ourselves. There's dark parts of our heart. There's things from our past that keep coming up. There's things we can't just break free of. And so we try and lead ourselves, but we're just led and enslaved by our own desires. We don't need to be saved from our culture, saved from religion. We need to be saved from ourselves. I read because I wasn't like that into the shepherding literature, I read a psychological study called Judgment Under Uncertainty, Heuristics and Biases. And the psychologist basically said that what ends up happening in our lives is we think we're free to make decisions, but we're actually not free because there's these subliminal cues, thousands and thousands of these subliminal cues that have shaped us over time. Our parents, our time of history, our nation of origin, our family dynamics, our college friends, our high school friends, our employees, the media sources, and all of this is like in the background forming this almost invisible subconscious web. And we think we're making rational, autonomous decisions, but they're actually controlled by all of these micro points of information. And often what it does is it results just in cognitive bias, where we just can't see beyond these invisible forces that are shaping our lives. There's a giant myth of autonomy and personalization in our culture. And many people, they say, no, let me just take control of my life. Let me edit out. Let me curate myself. End up finding that the algorithm is my shepherd. I got friends who work in tech, and they're like, every click you make is bringing the matrix on. It's like the whole thing's designed to just serve up to you what it thinks you want. Not even what you need, not even what's good for you, but whatever you happen to click on in any given moment. So we think we're autonomous, but we're shaped in insidious ways. But more than anything, we know in our hearts we can't lead ourselves. If you just did whatever you wanted, where would it take you? Now, it's into these choices here, leading myself, trusting in religion, or trusting in the culture at large, that a lot of people are just like, what hope is there then? Now, it's into these power dynamics that Jesus comes up and makes a claim. He makes a leadership claim. And this is his claim. I'm the good shepherd. I'm the good shepherd, but different in my leadership than any other form of leadership. I lay down my life for the sheep. Look at what he says here. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father and I lay down my life for the sheep, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up. I want to be very clear here. Jesus is not a failed first century political revolutionary who got churned up in these giant tectonic plates of power. Jesus is the God of the universe in human flesh who voluntarily inserted himself into the cogs of human power to jam them up and release another kind of leadership in the world. He laid his life down and he freely takes it up again. And this is important because you need someone who's not only kind, but you need someone who's strong. You need someone you can trust, but someone who can do the job. This is who Jesus is. And the reason I think it's so surprising, particularly for many secular and cynical people in New York, it's surprising to meet people who are in the city, very well educated, very thoughtful, who actually believe that Jesus Christ himself leads to the best kind of life. But have you ever read the Gospels? Have you ever just gone through the Gospels and said, what would the world be like if we submitted ourselves to Jesus? See, compared to what the Pharisees were doing in Ezekiel 34, look at Jesus' life. His whole life was tending to the flock, strengthening the weak, healing the sick, bandaging the injured, bringing back the strays, seeking and saving the lost. His leadership is one of washing feet, welcoming in outcasts, blessing and loving those with sexual brokenness, bringing together the most culturally diverse group of people you can imagine. Political terrorists, zealous. Tax collectors, those who betrayed the empire. Teenage fishermen, he's able to gather them all into a new humanity, all willing to submit their story under his leadership. He talks about this again and again. In Luke 15, he's got a parable talking about sheep. In the economy of God, God's willing to leave the 99 to find the one. It's extraordinary. There's simply never been someone like Jesus in all of history. The reason people in New York still follow him is because even though it's a surprise for many people, they've just been led, not chased by guilt or fear or condemnation, but they've just been led into a vision that has literally brought their hearts peace and acceptance and rest. This is my story. This is the story of many of the people sitting around you. I think, where would I be if I hadn't let Jesus lead me? Well, number one, I wouldn't be an American, and I don't mind this place, so thanks for that. Where would I be? I have no idea. If I just followed my desires and I followed my ambition, I'd be saying, I am my own shepherd. I want. There would be no peace in my soul. There'd be no still water. There'd be the valley of the shadow of death without comfort. There'd be war with my enemies, not a banquet in the presence of them. Life under my own leadership would be hard. But in submitting to Jesus, I found freedom, I found hope, I found purpose, I found a call, I found a loving community of people. And that's the story of many of the people in this room. They've given their lives to Jesus. They've said, okay, look, even though I have suspicion in my heart, even though I am terrified of the history of the church, I hear your voice and your invitation. And it sounds like good news. Christ sees us. He sought to save us. He died on the cross to take away our sin, and then he rose again. And life under Jesus' leadership is extraordinary. So I've adapted, next slide here. This is my version. This in that book wasn't a Christian book, so they didn't have Jesus' paradigm of life-giving leadership. Perhaps I'll submit it. But this is what I would like to put. This is life-giving leadership. You have loving leaders. They're servant-hearted. They're sacrificial. They care, they love. Who produced valued followers. Those who are called, who lead, and they model and they empower others. And those who need care. They find patience and they find kindness. And this leads to freeing environments where people are known and accepted, where there's trust, where there's truth, and where there's love. And I can guarantee, if you get in the middle of an environment like that, your soul will flourish. And this is what life is like under the leadership of Jesus. One bishop from another era, so we don't use language like this, but he just says this so poetically and so beautiful. This is how he articulates Jesus' leadership. The Good Shepherd proved and illustrated his own good shepherdhood by sympathy and love. It was by no flash of splendor or miracle of external power that he's proved his divine leadership over the hearts of men, but by coming to walk with them, to toil and hunger and suffer with them. He entered into mortal life by the same lowly door of human birth. He passed through it by the same path of toil and daily care. He made his exit from it through the same portal of suffering and death. In life and death, he walked with the sheep. Therefore, he could say, I'm the good shepherd, not merely because I'm commissioned and sent of my Father, not merely because I wield the power of omnipotence, but I am the good shepherd because I know my sheep and I'm known by my sheep. I love this vision. Jesus entered into the human story. He got through the cocoon of suspicion, laid down his life to rescue our hearts from sin, from cynicism, from doubt and despair, and slowly cut it open so we can emerge into a life of flourishing. This is what Spurgeon says. The eastern shepherd is the owner of his son. His wealth consists in sheep. He has seldom much of a house or much land. Ask him, how much are you worth? And he answers, so many sheep. We are Christ's wealth, the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints. The Lord's portion is his people. For their sakes he gave himself. So all of us, I believe, ache for this, a sense of direction. All of this ache for this. We ache for leadership in our life. So just ask yourself the question, who are you following? If you're not consciously following someone, you're subconsciously being led by someone else. I mean, I don't want to get all Bob Dylan or whatever, but you got to serve somebody. You got to serve somebody. Devil, Lord, culture, girlfriend, career, whatever. You're going to serve something. Who's leading you? Are you being led by the culture? Are you being led by religion? Being led by yourself? Or are you being led by Jesus? Jesus laid down his life for you. He wants to bring you into a future that's better. It's honestly better than you can imagine. It's not necessarily easy. It's very hard. Hard to go against the culture. But it's a life of depth and meaning and joy and purpose. So maybe you're here tonight and for the first time or whatever, you found in your cocoon of suspicion, you're like, I'm resonating with what you're saying. I see it. I see tonight. I see Jesus lay down his life for me. And if that's you, I just encourage you just to respond. My life was changed in a meeting by responding, by just saying, hey, that makes sense, Jesus, here's my life. Never been the same. Move from a toxic circle of culture into a life-giving circle of love. Just say, Jesus, here I am, I surrender to you. Be my shepherd. Be my shepherd. Maybe you're here tonight and you're wrestling with something. Maybe you feel trapped by something and you just need someone to pray for you. You need some care. We got a wonderful prayer team. These folks are servant-hearted, gentle spirit, but they have a real heart to help people just find freedom in Jesus. And maybe you're here tonight and you've got something big coming up this week. Feels like a decision where you need to hear God's voice. I just want to encourage you to respond to that. So I invite you to stand to your feet. And we're just going to close with just a time of response and a time of worship. Invite the prayer team to come forward. But if you sense tonight God's speaking to your heart, you're not right with God, you know it, whatever that means for you, you know it. And tonight you just want to say, Jesus, you've sought me. You found me in a high school in New York, Jesus. Here I am. And you want to come home, you just come forward. Someone would love to pray for you. Maybe there's something going on in your life and you just would like freedom from it. You like some sort of care. If you need prayer for physical healing, maybe you're like, I just need a fresh touch from the Holy Spirit. I just need an encounter with God. I need the care of the shepherd. If that's you, just while we're singing, I'm going to invite you to come forward. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. I've been at CrossFit and seen grown men cry. You go to CrossFit? You don't look like. I just went for the sample. Why are you judging me? Why are you judging me? My point is we have enthusiasm, we have response in every area of life. Why not our hearts? Why not our hearts? So if you sense God speaking to you tonight, I just want to encourage you to come forward for prayer. There's no pressure at all. But if you feel like you'd like somebody to pray for you, I want to encourage you to come forward. And we're just going to close by worshiping together.